Hi, Miss Butt here with our chapter 4 of our story. So what's happened so far? So Alva is a little girl who is helping her uncle Magnus on an investigation. The monk has gone missing. They found some runes that may or may not belong to her father. They haven't told the mother yet. So let's see what's going to happen next. So chapter 4. Remember, we're collecting runes, so I hope you're taking note. There is one on top of the page. Honoring the gods. He's gone, Magnus said, striding into Megan's lair. Jarl Erik dropped the meat he had been eating into his bowl and wiped a streak of fat from his chin. The monk, he mumbled through half-chewed food. Yes, Magnus answered. The hut was disturbed and there was evidence of a struggle. Erik, this is very bad. Someone has come into your property and seized a man who sought refuge in your hall. The people of Kilsgard are already terrified. There is a threatening presence in the mountains, but now it has crept here into our town. Erik pushed his bench back from the table with a loud scraping noise and moved towards Magnus. But before he could say anything, a shrill, croaking voice cut in the dark shadows of the back of the hall. A threat has beset us. A voice made Alva shudder. 2 men taken in the night. This is the work of Loki for sure. He has cast a curse on Kilsgard and is taking its visitors. Soon he will take us too. We are cursed. The outline of a figure crept into view as the speaker moved closer to the hut. But Alva knew this voice regardless. It was Sigrun, Sarah Kilsgard, slaughterer and sacrifice giver. As she moved into the light, her distorted figure and twisted face looked like Alva's night terrors. She stopped as she walked, and her full-length cloak rustled with the bunches of herbs, animal bones, and amulets she had woven into its weft. Sigrun had just one eye. In place of the second was a scarred hole, where it had been removed in service of Odin, the one-eyed god. The eye that remained was cloudy and flecked with silver shapes. White bristles emerged from her chin, while grey strands of hair crept from under Sigrun's black headscarf. Her face was lined with the passage of time and painted with chalk and charcoal, making her all the more ghoulish. Hear me, she announced to the hall. Hear me and heed me. Kilsgard is beset by strange events that even our wise crow of the West, Magnus Guthrason, cannot explain with his wisdom from overseas. It is clear that we need to call upon the help of our gods to rid us of this terror. The great god of mischief and mayhem, Loki, is behind these strange occurrences, and we must make sacrifice to him, so he will show us kindness. When he is satisfied with our gifts, Kilsgard will again be safe. She turned her single eye on Jarl Erik. You must arrange for every family to bring a sacrifice to the hall at sundown. It must be a worthy gift, something each family values and needs. Only then will Loki stop his games. Alva caught her breath. Would they have to bring an animal? Which one? Erik began to speak, but Sigrun lifted one brittle, bent, bony finger to her lips. Hush! This needs action, not words. I charge you with this. On your house and on your head, be this sacrifice. Jarl Erik, you need to protect your people. You need a sacrifice. With more haste than seemed possible for a woman of her age, she swept from the room. Magnus turned to the hearth and spat, making the flames flicker in his disgust. That woman is cruel, Erik, he said. It is unnecessary for the people to sacrifice good beasts for this. We still have to conduct our investigations, and stirring the town into a frenzy affair will not serve anyone. I urge you to ignore her and let me continue my work. No, Magnus, Erik replied sternly. Sigrun is terrifying, but we all know she communes with the gods. To anger her is to anger them. We must perform the ancient rituals regardless of what your travels have taught you. It is part of Kilsgard. It's the Viking way. The gods must be appeased. Alva could feel the nails on her fingers digging into the palms of her hands as she clenched her fists with silent rage. You follow what this man-old crone instructs, but I will not, Magnus responded. Alva and I have something real and useful to do. We will solve this riddle and we will capture this nightly, and we will use our minds and our eyes to do so. Her uncle words, Alva and I, brought a fresh flood of warm excitement to her. But she quickly scurried away from Jarl Erik, following Magnus as he stormed out of the hall. Uncle, I don't like Sigrun's sacrifices. Well, we have to give something too. Fenrir had followed Alva into the hall and was waiting by the door, being eyed nervously by passers-by. As they walked towards home, he fell into steep behind them and for a moment, Alva feared that she might have to give her beloved wolf up for sacrifice. She went cold at the thought. Yes, I imagine we will, but we have little we can spare. This is why your father left us to go a Viking. Alva, as he worried, that we do not have enough wealth or possessions to lose even one beast will affect us through the winter. You know that I cling to Odin and the gods, but surely you can see the census rituals are not what we need right now. There are many others in the village who are struggling too and can poorly afford to give up valuable animals for slaughter during the cold months. Come, we have to examine the evidence. If our minds work fast, we may be able to give about a solution before sundown. Alva felt a great sense of urgency. She didn't want to see any of her animals die at the cruel hands of this wicked crone. They had to set their minds to work fast. Back at home, with Fenrir slouched comfortably under the table and Hraf perched at the back of Magnus's chair, Alva and Magnus spread the clues they'd gathered across the oak table. Ivan played with a small wooden wolf their father had carved for them before he left, as Brianna grumpily presented bowls of stew. She was still resolutely silent, quietly raging at Magnus for taking Alva from the home without her permission. Alva wondered how long her feisty mother would be able to keep up this pretense. Surely she was curious at the array of strange objects spread over the table. Alva sat with her uncle, spooning hot, sloppy nourishment into her mouth. She was famished. In front of them lay the bone fragment, Magnus's sketches of the monks' carvings and Edmund's parchments, a lot to decipher. I can't make any sense of it, Alva said, banging her spoon on the side of the wooden bowl. I can see runes, I know, but I can see a message. And the monks' mad scrawlings on that calf skin, I've no idea where to start. Okay, Magnus said calmly, I can assist you with that. My Latin is not excellent, but I have learned enough to get the sense of what is recorded here. He ran his finger around the edge of the green image of land settling on the small ink letters surrounding it. The monk had kept some sort of account of journeys here. I am sure of it. Look, he pointed at a small red outline and looked like a hall depicted near the top of the parchment. The notation says Lindisfarne, and the smaller writing underneath reads home. The monk Edmund was from this monastery. Alva interjected. So he begins in Lindisfarne, and then this line shows he travelled south. Magnus ran his finger down the parchment. All along the way, he has added notes. Look, near to this stretch of water, he writes how they waited 2 days for a ship to take them to Gaul, and that the crossing was treacherous. And over here, he pointed to another red building on the other side of the stretch of blue water. The monk has written, here Abbot Dennis, give us room and food. We prayed with the brothers. This is an important document. But does it say anything about father, about where they may have met him, or where they got that box? Alva asked earnestly. Magnus turned over a few leaves of parchment until he came to a third map. This showed more brown and less blue, so Alva guessed it must be a map of inland. Magnus bent his face close to the small script, slowly reading the monk's scribbles in the margin. There's no reference to Bjorn, but this is interesting. Here, by a town in Francia, the monk has written the word Vikingi. He records that he met with Vikings, so perhaps it's me he met with Bjorn. Alva looked at the little Latin word Vikingi. She didn't like it. How could one little word describe the strong men of her village, men like her father who went out on dangerous seas searching for sustenance for their people over the hard winter months? Their brave adventurers were the fiercest in the world. Her father told her that. There were so much more than that little scribble, but that was all the monk had written. Magnus was now looking at another page. There were more maps, but they were less ornate, just lines and names linked together. Alva saw a red trail of ink moving up the page. Does this mean they came north, Uncle? She asked, tracing the line with her finger. I think so, Alva, he replied. I think this is where our bold monk picked up the trail from our riddling box. And here is what he was after. As he turned to yet another page, Alva saw a final map and something strange, an image of a man. It looked so real. The face was pink and fleshy, and the clothes were bright, embroidered, rich. It was as if the figure could step out of the page. Alva stepped away from the parchment. In the sunlight, she could see that the figure's head was surrounded by a ring of pure gold. Who is that? She asked nervously. And why is he ringed with gold? Is he God? I've spent time with Christians on my travel. They only worship one God, but they also honor a mother, a son, a spirit, and a whole collection of the dead. They call them saints. I think this is a saint. And look, Alva, above the man's head is one word, treasure. Ivan suddenly let out a scream. He was sat on the floor of the hut, with a wooden wolf lying in front of him. The leg had snapped off. Brianna rushed to the mass of crying red hair, swooping him off the ground, and looked down sadly at the broken toy. Another piece of your father gone, she mumbled quietly, then swept Ivan off to their bed. Alva felt a tug at her heart as she thought of her father sat by the fire, whittling the wood to make the little broken toy, and it pulled her out of her trance. She had been so excited that Magnus was asking her opinion, working through the evidence with her help, that for a short moment she had forgotten the pain her father's absence left imprinted on their home every day. Plus, she had been transfixed by this picture of what looked like a living god on the pages of animal skin. At Ivan's cry, Magnus too was roused to action. He grabbed the parchment, rolled it up, and pushed it to one side. Alva, he said, we can only get so far with the monk's scribbles, but we have our own tongue here to decipher. We can decode these runes. In fact, if it was your father who scratched them, I think that we alone can understand them. We've seen our names on the lid, but what other runes were there on the casket? We should look at the monk's carvings. He pulled the tablet with a small etching over towards them. This is what I could see from the monk's scratchings on the wall. I think they may be incomplete and incorrect. Memorized by a monk whose first language is English and who writes in Latin, not in runes. But we must try. Now, child, you have a good understanding of the runes. Both your father and I have tried to impress their importance on you over the years, since we're both fortunate to have been taught the gift of reading them. Now's your chance to show me whether all we taught you entered your mind hoard. Your turn, Alva. Tell me how we read these symbols. Alva thought back to the many times she had sat at this table with her father as he carved shapes into pieces of wood. With each carving, he would recite poems until Alva knew the stories and legends connected to each symbol by heart. Uncle, she said, the runes are letters, but they're also words, and beyond that, they are stories. Good, Magnus answered. When we use these symbols, they can work in different ways, and this is how the skilled user of runes can encrypt their messages. Sometimes a rune will be a simple letter, sometimes a word, and sometimes a reader will have to cast their minds further to a web of hidden meanings. Now, what has this monk written? They're both focused on the lines, from right to left. I cannot read this, Uncle, Alva said after a moment. I'm sure it's encrypted, as there are some parts that make no sense. Indeed, Alva, Magnus said thoughtfully. What words can you make out? After staring more intently for a moment, Alva's face lit up. Oh, look, she said. There's a name, Kilsgard. Sorry, excuse me. So the opening directs the reader to our village. Good, Magnus answered. There are also smaller words that stand out clearly. Look, for, of, the, to. They are directions. I could see a name, Alva squealed excitedly. Jarl Erik. Yes, said Magnus' excitement, creeping into his voice too. It says from Jarl Erik's Hall, and here is a shortened version of Giant's Finger, Thor's Finger. There are certainly directions. Which runes are encoded, do you think, Alva? She scanned the runes, eliminating those that joined to make full words, names, or locations, and settled on a few that stood alone. The ones that are by themselves, perhaps they are meant to be read as words rather than letters. What do you think? I think you're right, he replied, smiling at her. So now we've eliminated the runes we know. That leaves us with the encrypted ones. Here it reads Fihu of the Answers. You must know what that means, girl. Alva thought for a moment. Treasure of the gods. Good, he replied. Now you know what this rune here means. He gestured to the radio rune. That means journey. So it's saying the reader should journey to Kilsgard. But I really don't understand this next section. Magnus brought the circle of glass out from the pouch and focused it on one of the runes. This is the rune Vunyu, which means, Alva interrupted, it means joy. Yes, the joys of the Western foes, Alva, said Magnus. I know what is it referring to. He took a step back from the table and turned away from her. When he spoke again, his voice was low and slow. Seeing her uncle's change in mood, Alva gripped the edge of the table and held her breath, waiting for him to continue. After a long pause, he spoke. Alva, you have heard the many tales of my and your father's journeys to the distant land. of the English and to the island of Lindisfarne just last year. It is a strange place nestled on the edge of the kingdom of the Northern English, and it is entirely inhabited by weak yet perilously rich monks. Your father had heard of these undefended monk towns on his travels and brought news back to Jarl Eric. He spread the information to the other Jarls of the north, and it was agreed to send a small set of ships to the island to investigate whether it was true that treasures were defended by peace-loving, unarmed men. Your father and I agreed to accompany the ships, since we knew some Latin and could represent the Jarl's interests. Alva interjected, I remember that you and father were at odds when you returned. You argued in the weeks after you got back, and then father went away again so suddenly. I never knew what happened there. Magnus turned back towards Alva. He had a sad and distant look in his eyes. He sat down next to her and took her hand. Alva, he said, when men go a Viking, it can be a bloody and brutal business. Often we will travel for days on wild oceans, and when we reach the shore, the locals want to murder us and turn us away. When we set our sails for Lindisfarne, we all had the wolf of battle in our bellies, and the thirst of gold made our mouths dry. As our boats climbed the shallow shores, we could see the monks fleeing, and they rang bells, escaping further inland. There had been men from our lands on this island before, and they were terrified. When they saw our dragon-prowed ships, many of the men leapt onto the sand, hungry for slaughter, fame, and fortune. But your father and I knew that the Christians kept their wealth in their main temple. They called this their church. We were directly spilling no blood. Once we were in the sanctuary, however, we found 3 of the monks pulling a box from beneath a stone slab. They were startled, and 2 of them ran. The third lay down in front of the box, screaming in Latin, "Take me, not our treasure." Your father pushed the man aside, and he struck his head on the stone altar. He moved no more. I reproached your father for his actions, but the 2 of us knew that we had found the most precious treasure the monks possessed. So we laid claim to it and took it to the ship. When we finally opened the box, we found some gold-encrusted books and bones. We had secured a good haul of gold from the journey, so we're not concerned that Jarl Eric would expect more from our expedition. Bjorn insisted we kept the box secret from the other men, since he knew they would be superstitious and say we would cast the bones into the sea. But we knew their true worth. Your father and I remembered what we had learned on our travels about the bones of saints. They were valued more highly than any treasure, since Christians think they can work wonders and can take directly to their God. To some, they're worth more than any pile of gold your mind can picture. That sounds crazy, Alva interrupted, shaking her head in disbelief. How can bones be worth more than gold? They are called relics, Magnus replied, and they're thought to connect those on earth with those in the afterlife. I argued with your father about them, as I did not want to touch the remains of one of these Christian saints, and felt we shouldn't show them to Jarl Eric. Bjorn wanted to keep them, sell them, and bring wealth to his family, since we were struggling then as we are now. He thought he could ransom the treasures back to the monks, perhaps, or we could sell the bones to other Christians on our travels for huge sums. He felt the other men and the Jarl would not understand their value, and that he and I had found them alone, so they were rightfully ours. Bjorn became possessive and secretive about the bones when we got back to Kilsgård. He told me he had hidden them. He spoke very mysteriously about them, and when I asked him, saying the treasures would do more than bring us earthly riches, they would bring us riches of the heart and soul. I am a man who has travelled widely. I know the reputation of our men have across Christian lands. We are called heathens, barbarians, and murderers. Just look at the blood sacrifices Sigrun has in store for our town tonight. Blood and violence runs deep through our legends. When I journey, I try to temper the men's bloodlust, but our lives and those of our people here in Kilsgård depends on our efforts. And if we want our place alongside the gods in Valhalla, we'll have to secure fame and glory. Nevertheless, I know we took something the monks valued very greatly, and I fear that now is our time to answer for it. I've been reluctant to tell anyone of this story, since it cast your father in a dark light. Even your mother was never told of this. Leaning closer to her uncle, Alva replied, my father bought the death of one of those peace-loving monks, and he hid treasure from the Jarl. Your father is a good man, but a complicated one. His head is always full of stories, fantasies, and quests. He loves you, Brianna, and even deeply, but sometimes his thoughts and actions are hard to read. This is why we argued. Magnus answered sadly. I was angry with your father for the events at Linda's farm, but your mother was also angry. She felt you were becoming more reckless while we were away biking, because Bjorn always gave you such freedom and treated you like his equal. She didn't want your father to go away again. Brianna felt he should stay here and encourage you to change your ways. I felt he should be honest with the Jarl before his departure, and so we find ourselves in this situation now. We've been waiting 9 months for Bjorn's intervention, and here it is. What do you mean? Asked Alva, feeling confused. Your father carved the casket to show us, his family, where he had hidden the treasure. I still can't fully understand why, but it's clear that these riddles direct us to the joys of the Western foes. The bones of the saint. This is why the monk and the English warriors came here, and that is why they are now missing. We have to solve these riddles and find the treasure your father has hidden for us. Then we can decide what to do with it. So this is the end of our chapter. Are there any words that you weren't quite sure of? I hope that you've written them down and written down what they actually mean. And so the next time you write a story, you'll be able to use those words. Thank you for listening.